Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today we have episode 5 of The Squire. I hope you enjoy it.
The next day at noon, Cole and the other squires gathered in the castle courtyard. Every carpenter in the city must have spent the whole day yesterday building bleachers and other stands and platforms that filled the area. Banners flapped in the breeze, each decorated with a noble's heraldic device. He spotted Sir Garrus's screaming golden eagle on black, fluttering near the end of the right-hand bleachers. Cole shook his head at the complete waste of time and lumber. At least the constant stream of information the ring fed him yesterday had slowed to a trickle. Perhaps he'd gotten used to it. The lesser nobles and wealthy personages lucky enough to get invited to the tournament filled the bleachers to capacity, and now only the royal family's arrival held up the start of the tournament. And the castle gates creaked open. Speak of the demon, Cole thought. All the knights, dressed in full armor, moved to stand on either side of a golden carpet that covered the ground all the way to the royal box. After a moment's delay, the king, queen, and princess all stepped out together and started down the carpet. They wore enough gold, gems, and silk between the three of them to finance a small war or buy a smaller country. The knights brought gauntleted fists against their breastplates in a salute that sounded more like the start of a battle. The royal family made their stately way down the carpet past the knights toward their box. When they reached the squires, Rain stopped and pulled a blue scarf from around her waist and handed it to Callion. "Fight well, my champion," she said. Cole forced himself not to smile. It would be a fight this year. Whatever the cost, he wouldn't stand aside for Callion. Callion bowed gracefully and accepted her token. "All my victories for you, princess." Rain blushed and hurried to catch up with her parents. When they reached the royal box, the king looked out over the assembled knights and squires, raised his hands and said, "Let the tournament begin." Cole and the other squires walked the short distance from the greeting line to the archery field. Someone had drawn a white line on the ground and 30 paces away set up round hay bale targets. He found Sir Garrus waiting, his long bow and a bundle of arrows laid on the ground at the elder knight's feet. He gathered the arrows and checked them for damage. "That shows a distinct lack of faith," Sir Garrus said. Cole smiled. "I don't have a great deal of faith as a general rule." He held up 3 arrows so warped he doubted they'd make it to the target, much less hit where he aimed. "I need some replacements." Sir Garrus glanced at the arrows. "Disgraceful. These are barely fit to be kindling." "Page!" A blond boy wearing a crimson tabard hurried over. 3 replacements, and make sure they're straight." "Yes, my lord." The boy hurried toward the armory. Sir Garrus snapped the 3 warped arrows over his knee. "Good luck, Cole." He clapped Cole on the back and stepped behind the firing line with the other knights. Cole braced his bow against his knee and bent it until he could hook the string. He looked downrange and saw the targets 30 paces away, 4 concentric circles, the largest 12 inches around. When all the squires were in place, the archery judge approached, a grizzled old knight that had retired from combat years ago and now served as the instructor of archery. "The contest is simple." His voice sounded like an angry bear. 3 shots each. Best 8 scores advance. The top 8 will pair off until one is left the champion. Clear? "Yes, sir," they shouted in unison. "Fire when ready." Cole drew and loosed, quick and smooth, not thinking, letting his body do what it knew to do. When his 3 shots had struck, he had 3 bullseyes, a perfect score of 30. The top 8 separated from the rest. Cole had the only perfect score, though 2 others were only 3 points behind him. They took a quick break as the pages moved the targets 10 paces downrange. Cole's first opponent, with the unfortunate name of John Squire, was the 3rd son of a minor noble family too inconsequential to be part of Callion's crew, and thus a half-decent fellow for a noble. Cole and John would shoot last, so they watched the first 3 matches. Callion paired off with Joseph Stone. Joseph's family was distantly related to Callion's, and he knew his place. Cole harbored no question who would win, and moments later the judge awarded Callion the victory. The better man actually won the next 2 matches, and then Cole's turn arrived. He held out his hand. "Good luck." John shook with him and smiled. "You too, though I don't think you'll need it." Cole smiled back, and a minute later 2 bullseyes and an 8 had him through to the next round. The pages moved the targets back another 10 paces, and this time Cole got paired with Marcus something or other. The guy's last name escaped him. Callion got paired with Thomas North, probably Cole's only real competition in archery. Unfortunately, Thomas took tradition seriously, so no way would he try to beat Callion. Cole and Marcus shot first this time, and as they stepped to the line, they shook hands. Cole matched his score from the previous round and beat Marcus by 5 points. They stepped back to let Callion and Thomas approach. Cole gave Marcus a friendly clap on the shoulder. "Good shooting." Marcus shook his head and grinned. "Not good enough." "Doesn't matter anyway. Callion's going to win." Cole grinned back. "Don't count on it." Marcus's smile vanished. "He's the princess's champion. We're supposed to let him win." "Tradition isn't law, Marcus. I'd rather break on the rack than let that bastard beat me." Marcus looked surprised, but his grin soon returned. "It's your neck. I wish I had the stones to try it. My father would kill me if I did anything to upset Callion." "You'd have to get past me first anyway, so don't worry about it." They shared a laugh, then turned to watch the next match. Cole wondered if Thomas would withdraw or miss on purpose. The question was answered when Thomas bowed to Callion and said, "I withdraw." Callion raised his hands and waved like he'd won something, and the crowd cheered. How loud will they cheer when Cole beat him? Not too loud, he suspected. The pages moved the targets another 10 paces back. The page Sir Garrus had sent off returned with Cole's last 3 arrows with seconds to spare. Cole smiled as he accepted them, and as soon as the page turned away, he checked them over. Perfectly straight. He grinned, slipped them into his empty quiver, and stepped up beside Callion. A hush fell over the crowd as they waited for Cole to withdraw. They might as well wait for the sun to rise in the west. When it became clear he planned to go forward with the contest, the judge gave Cole a narrow-eyed glare. "For the final round, the scores will be announced after each shot. Fire when ready." Cole knocked, drew, and loosed in one smooth motion. He hit a little high, but scored 5. Callion caught the edge of the target for 2 points. Squire Cole leads 5 points to 2. Fire when ready. Before the next shot, Callion looked over at him and hissed, "You're insulting the princess and me, peasant. Stand down or there will be hell to pay." Cole gave him a cold glare. "You can try and collect in the sword ring." He adjusted his aim and shot again, this time hitting in the 8-point ring. Callion improved a little as well, collecting 5 points. Squire Cole leads 13 to 7. Fire when ready. The voices in the crowd grew louder as it became clear Cole had no intention of letting Callion win. "Last chance, Callion. Better make it good. You wouldn't want to disappoint the princess." Callion's hands shook when he drew his final arrow, and Cole knew he'd won. Callion's arrow sailed 5 yards over the target. Though it wasn't necessary, Cole drew his final arrow and adjusted his aim a little more. He knew it was a good shot as soon as he loosed it. Cole grinned as the arrow buried itself in the bullseye. He unstrung his bow and leaned on the stave. "You will not embarrass me again," Callion said, like he believed it. Why, Cole had no idea. "I look forward to proving you wrong in the dueling ring." Callion stomped off. The stunned silence from the crowd pleased Cole even more than the thunderous cheers would have. "Nice shooting," Sir Garrus said. "Thank you, sir. I hope you won't think ill of me, but I quite enjoyed that." Sir Garrus put a hand on his shoulder. "You competed honorably and won fairly. Nothing to be ashamed of there." Cole saw no reason to point out that what he enjoyed most was watching Callion squirm. If ever a fat head needed deflating, it was Callion's. They turned at a discreet cough to see the king's herald dressed head to toe in garish crimson silks, waiting. "It is time for the reward ceremony." "Winning was reward enough for me," Cole said. "Very humble," the herald said. "But I wasn't asking if you wanted to participate. I'm telling you the king is waiting." Cole looked at Sir Garrus, who nodded. Just don't get greedy. The princess's champion usually asks for a kiss. Cole grimaced. He certainly would not ask Rain for a kiss in front of hundreds of people. The herald grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the royal box. Kneel and don't speak until you're spoken to. No problem. Cole wasn't certain he'd be able to speak after the king spoke to him, but he'd cross that bridge when he got to it. The herald gave him a little shove toward a small carpet spread before the royal box. Cole took a knee and bowed his head. He felt more nervous now than he had during the contest. Fine shooting, Squire, the king said. Rise and tell us how we may reward you for your outstanding display. The king didn't sound angry, and when Cole got to his feet, he thought His Majesty looked amused. Rain, however, looked like she had eaten a barrel of pickled eel. He thought for a moment of asking for that kiss after all, but self-control got the best of him. Your Majesty, I would ask for a new saddle and tack for my horse. He'd been using Sir Garrus's old gear for the last few years, and it would be nice to have something new. Besides, if it was a gift from the king, maybe the other squires would think twice before scratching it up. A fine and useful request, Squire. It shall be as you ask. Best of luck in the next round. Cole bowed, and out of the corner of his eye he saw Rain frowning. Thank you, Your Majesty. After the next round, her frown would be even deeper if he had his way. He backed away 3 paces, turned, and walked toward his mentor. Sir Garrus met him halfway and handed over a heavy suit of leather armor and a wooden practice sword. What's wrong with my old riding gear? Nothing, sir. I just couldn't... His stammering came to a halt when he saw the smirk on Sir Garrus's face. You did fine. Most people aren't half so calm at their first royal audience. I only asked for riding gear because I couldn't think of anything else. Forget it, Cole. Come on, the dueling ring is almost ready. When they arrived, the servants were hanging the last rope from posts around a square, raised platform that would serve as the dueling ring. Cole fastened the final buckle on his armor, then gave the wooden sword a couple swings to get the feel of it. The rest of the squires and their mentors had arrived along with the Master of Swords who would judge the event. The rules are simple, the Swordmaster said. You've paired up by random draw. First man to get 5 touches wins. Any questions? No one spoke, so the Master called the first pair. The squires fought carefully, and the match lasted a good 5 minutes. Cole watched for a while, but it soon became clear neither man would be a match for him, so he let his mind wander. They called Callion for the next match, and his opponent withdrew. How he could take any pride in such a travesty, Cole couldn't imagine, but then he was just a peasant, and the minds of the nobility were beyond him. When they called him for the final match of the first round, he paired off against Joran, one of Callion's flunkies that didn't get expelled from the order in disgrace. Cole stepped into the ring facing his opponent. I have to put you down, peasant. Nothing personal, Joran said. A faint glow around Joran's sword forced Cole to look closer. He could just make out a sword billet sandwiched between the layers of wood. A solid blow with that would break his sword or his head. Cole fingered the ring of truth. The practice sword was a lie, which must explain the surrounding glow. On guard, the swordmaster said. Cole raised his suddenly less than adequate wooden sword. He'd have to be cautious. Begin! Joran attacked with a combination of brutal chops and slashes, probably hoping to break Cole's sword. Cole dodged and circled, letting the wild swings tire his opponent. It didn't take long for the other squire to overcommit and leave himself open. Cole whipped his sword down across Joran's right wrist. One! The judge shouted. Cole felt pleased to get the first touch, but even more pleased to see Joran's right hand hanging useless by his side. And with just his offhand, Joran had no chance now. He made a weak slash at Cole, who dodged with a foot to spare. Drop your sword, Joran. My fight's with Callion, not you. Joran roared and charged at him. Cole dodged again and cracked him across the left wrist. The sword fell from Joran's grasp. 2! You're done, Joran. Yield. I'll never yield to you, peasant, Joran spat. Suit yourself. Cole struck him hard across the ribs, drawing a gasp of pain. 3. He lunged, driving the tip of the practice sword into Joran's gut, doubling him over and driving him to his knees. 4. I hope Callion made it worth the pain, Cole said. He brought his sword down on Joran's head, knocking him cold. 5. Winner advances. Cole picked up Joran's sword and stepped out of the ring ahead of 2 men carrying a stretcher to transport Joran to the healer's tent. You were a little rough on him, Sir Garrus said. He deserved what he got and then some. Cole tossed Joran's sword to his mentor. Take a look at this. Sir Garrus caught the practice sword, hefted it and frowned. He looked closer. There's a sword billet between the wood. Cole nodded. Callion told him to take me out. He might have killed me with that if he knew how to use it. What do you want to do? Sir Garrus asked. I'd like to rip Callion's head off, but that seems unlikely, so I guess I'll let it go. All right, I'll hang on to this. Sir Garrus hefted the not-so-safe practice sword. They turned back toward the ring in time to see Callion's next opponent withdraw. When the Master of Swords called Cole's next match, it lasted less than a minute. Watching him dismantle his first opponent must have knocked the fight out of the rest. His semifinal match ended just as quick, then Callion's turn arrived. Cole stood in the ring, his sword resting on his shoulder, his defeated opponent scurrying out behind him. Callion stood outside looking at him. Cole smiled and beckoned him forward. Callion's face tightened with fear and anger. The sight warmed Cole's heart. Participating in the final match are Squire Cole and Squire Callion, the judge announced. The judge glanced at him and raised an eyebrow. Cole grinned back. He had no intention of withdrawing, and he suspected the master knew it. To his surprise, Callion actually screwed up the nerve to step into the ring. Cole gave his sword a twirl. Callion glared, and Cole smiled in his face. Ready? The judge asked. Cole nodded. Callion struggled to swallow. I withdraw. A murmur ran through the audience. The master stared at him for a moment. Are you certain? The princess's champion has never withdrawn from a match in the history of the Squire's tournament. Cole almost danced with joy when Callion said, I'm certain, and threw his sword to the ground. This was even better than beating him bloody. He would never live down the shame, not that he seemed to have much. Squire Cole is the winner of the single combat tournament, the judge announced. Scattered applause greeted the announcement, but mostly stunned silence. Cole wondered how Callion's father would take it when he learned of his son's disgrace. He would give much to be a fly on the wall listening to that conversation. When Cole stepped out of the ring, the king's herald was waiting beside Sir Garrus. You must stand before the king again. He sounded astonished to be saying it to Cole for a second time today. I'll hold your sword, Sir Garrus said. Thank you, sir, for everything. Cole couldn't begin to tell his mentor how much he appreciated being allowed to compete to win. He hoped Sir Garrus wouldn't get in any trouble, though he was pretty sure being the king's friend would keep any trouble to a minimum. Come, Squire, the king awaits. Cole nodded and followed the herald back to the royal box. He knelt on the small piece of carpet before the king. Well, Squire, it seems congratulations are once again in order. It has been many years since the princess's champion has lost an event, much less 2. Rise and tell us what reward you would have this time. Cole smiled and rose to his feet. I would ask for the traditional champion's prize, a kiss from the princess. There was an audible gasp from the crowd, and Cole just about laughed at the wide-eyed horror on Rain's face. Even if she refused, it was worth asking to see that look. The king laughed and seemed well pleased with his request. A noble prize indeed. Rain, give our champion his reward. Rain looked around in desperation. Surely we should wait until after the final event. Why? The king asked. This young man has won 2 of 3 events. He is our champion regardless of the results of the final event. He has made his request, and you will not dishonor your family by denying it. Yes, father. She sounded like the words almost choked her. Rain made her way down from the royal box as slowly as she could and still moved forward. Cole stood and watched, content to enjoy the show. Whatever he might think about the princess, she was beautiful. The elaborate coils of hair, smooth, pale skin, curves to murder for. In all truth, he enjoyed the fact that each step seemed to cause her physical pain almost as much as the view. Pity she was such a bitch. She would have made a fine girlfriend. When she stood a pace away from him, she looked mad enough to chew steel. "I swear I'll get you for this," she whispered loud enough for him alone to hear. Cole smiled. "Thank you, princess." He spoke up so everyone could hear. "Your beauty is surpassed only by your graciousness." He heard a murmur of approval from the crowd. He leaned forward to collect his reward. When their lips touched, the castle wall exploded inward, sending them flying in a spray of stone.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Fiction Friday. If you liked what you heard, you can find more of my fiction on my website, jamesewisher.com. Please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing with anyone else you think might enjoy the show. Until next week, goodbye.